Hi, Steve.
Hi, Joe. Oh, here.
There you go.
Had my blocker on there. How are you?
I'm doing fine, and you?
Great. I'm doing all right. Yeah.
We're having an early spring here. We have actually have plants in bloom. The winter aconites and daffodils up. It's a little early for them.
Wow. I thought you guys were still pretty cold.
Well, we were up until a week or so ago.
Okay.
Things change on a dime around here.
Caught up quickly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're actually having a late spring.
Oh,
Like coralopsis and things like that are just coming into flower.
well, that's
It's
good.
pretty cold here.
Maybe there'll be more for me to see when I'm out there in was it 2 months or so from now? So
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Let me see if I need to turn up my volume. Yeah, there will be plenty then. Early May is generally pretty good.
good. Looking
So you're
forward.
coming out for the conference, you mean?
I am, yes, yeah.
Okay, great. Are you doing the tour prior to the?
No, but we are going to the RSBG 2 days. The first day we get there, we're flying into Seattle, so we're going to go there then drive down to the conference. And then on the way home, the same thing, stop off there.
Right.
We'll be there before, I think the day we get there, Tuesday, is the day that there's going to be an official tour bus going there. We'll be there earlier than that, but
Okay.
maybe we'll hang out to meet some or see some of our friends there.
Yeah, you bet. If I have time, I can show you around a little bit. Might be kind of a hectic day, but
Well, I'm sure, yeah.
see how it goes. Yeah.
I won't assume anything given what's going on there. So
Yeah, and usually if you haven't been to the garden, it's better just to walk around and look at what you want to look at anyway. I mean, there's plenty to see without having someone show you.
and I find 2 visits to a new place like that are absolutely necessary. When we went to Windsor Great Park, we found the big leaf section there, and it was so fabulous and so much to take in. We wound up going back there about 3 days later, and it was really worth it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you always find things you missed the first time.
So do you want to just try putting up your slideshow?
Sure.
People get on.
Uh,
Let me give you the make you a co-host.
okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
go for it.
Wait, what do I do here? Oh, I need to do share screen, right? Okay. Yeah, you see that, right?
Yep, looks good. Looks good.
Okay. I think we're good then.
Okay, good. All right. So now let's see. How do I get you out of there? Well, we can just leave that up. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Or you can blank it out, whatever. I don't have any slides to show.
Okay.
Just going to be talking before introducing you
Okay.
and afterwards for that matter.
Okay. Yeah, no hurry on my part. So if you have meeting things to deal with.
No, I'm going to postpone all the business stuff until after. So you can go on right away, and then we'll talk about a few announcements and whatnot. So if you want to, you can drop off.
Okay.
They're probably going to be quick, but sometimes we get into discussions, and I don't want to hold up your presentation.
Oh, I appreciate that. I normally don't mind hearing what's going on. I might stick around, but also this is my only day off, so I might just take off and head home too. So
yeah, I can understand that. Yeah.
Yeah.
We
how's the group doing? Have you guys been meeting in person for a while, or?
well, we have been whenever possible. Last fall, we held 2 in-person meetings, and we had a Zoom meeting in January because that's just what we're tending to do in January because of the potential for bad weather. But in April, our April meeting hopefully will be in person. As long as COVID remains, at bay,
Right.
we'll have an in-person meeting. And I intend to have every meeting in person unless there's some reason.
Right. Right.
The ones that we've had in person went very well. I haven't heard of any bad problems. Everyone I know has been multiply vaccinated, and
Right.
I think there's no reason to not now. So,
Right. No, I totally agree. Yeah.
but there's some people. Everyone's level of risk seems to be different. Some people are ultra wary, and they avoid, they wear masks still, and they avoid crowds at all costs. But
Right.
most people that I know are just fine, relaxed. I know some people that never changed one thing they did during the whole pandemic.
I know it. It's incredible.
It's
Yeah.
fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Just another Chinese hoax.
Yeah, well, not quite, but it's,
Yeah.
yeah, it's,
But yeah, it's incredible how people have approached it differently, though. You know, I've visited family in Idaho in the middle of it all, and it's like nothing was happening, you know.
yeah.
Just everybody's walking around in the stores and no masks and, you know, just crazy. It's
I'll
like,
tell you, I'm hearing a lot of people are getting it now, though. One family that I know, it's run through the entire family. Every one of them has been vaccinated 3 times, but
right.
they're getting it now.
Yeah.
Not a really bad case, but
Right.
for
Right.
the most part, though, one person did lose his sense of smell for a while, smell and taste.
Yeah. The long haul is what my wife and I kind of worry about, you know, just having some conditions that persist for years. That just doesn't seem very fun at all.
On the other hand, another person I know, right after he got the 3rd vaccine, he came down with what appeared to be a really severe reaction to it. His joints swelled up and he could barely walk for a while, and looks like it's going to have long-term debilitating effects from it. He was fine before that. So, you know, there's a risk both ways.
Right. From the vaccine, you mean?
Yeah, he believes because of the timing, it was from the vaccine. And I've heard other anecdotal stories of that. So, you know, that story has made me reluctant to get a 4th shot. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Makes you think for sure.
Yeah.
Do I have 3 people entered the waiting room? Do I do something there, or is that?
Oh, yeah. I just clicked to let him in. Yeah, I guess I can't see him now. Let me see if I can set this up so I can see them. I guess I cannot. Maybe I should take control back for a bit so you don't have to do that.
Oh, I don't care. I can do it if I need to.
Okay. Yeah, I think I inadvertently set this up with a waiting room instead of anyone can join at any
Oh, yeah, I
time.
can hit admit all. So.
Yeah, that's good.
All right. Okay. Go grab something quick. I'll be right back.
I think somehow they're not coming on by video. Let's see what I can do here. I'm going to ask them to start their video. There we go. It's one person.
How has attendance been at your meetings? A lot of clubs are doing really poorly.
I'm not getting sound.
It's actually been a little better with Zoom than in-person meetings.
Okay, right.
But membership is held up. Nice.
Okay, great.
Really?
Hey, Steve.
Couldn't do that.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Susan.
Yeah, we've been doing well with Zoom because we've been getting people who don't drive to meetings or don't want to come the distance or.
Yeah, it's been a benefit in a lot of ways, for sure.
The first meeting, very first Zoom meeting we held, which was, I believe, if I remember right, it was in a joint meeting with the Connecticut chapter. We had almost 50 people, which is a lot more than we've had in in-person meetings in a long time.
Right.
But they've since trailed off a little bit. I think people prefer the in-person meetings.
Right.
Some of us don't. I'd like to keep doing a mix. Certainly in the winter, we do well with the Zoom.
There's no reason why we can't do it for speakers that are so far away, like Steve, or our January meetings. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good way to get a wider selection of speakers, that's for sure. And you can join other ARS chapters. I've joined in with some of the West Coast chapters when they had decent good speakers or things I was interested in, I should say. Just because you have the Zoom, I don't have to fly to California just for a lecture,
Yeah.
But we've been getting Hank Borgi to come to our meetings, He's still a chapter member, but he lives in Holland.
Right.
So
Yeah, that's good.
it's a mix.
Yeah.
And we have Dick Chaikin, who's on right now, who's in
Okay.
Florida.
That must be Virea, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, Dick.
Rich Robbins is Connecticut.
Okay.
Howdy.
Hey, Rich. Laura, I don't know who Laura is. Laura, what's your last name? I think she's muted right now. Let me ask her to unmute.
Now, people's Zoom nicknames are frustrating unless you happen to know them, because there's no way of knowing who is
Right.
who. And as Ron Rabideau saw, it means you can be trolled a little more easily.
Right.
Say, Joe, do you remember Wayne was talking about his deer repellent, and I forgot what it was called.
Oh, Bitrex.
Bitrex.
Bitrex. Yeah.
I've been mixing small, imprecise amounts of Bitrex powder in with my standard, whatever commercial deer spray I buy, and a good bit of wilt proof, which keeps the stuff on the plant well. And I tell you, as long as I keep up with the spraying, the deer really hate that stuff.
Where did you?
We're gonna have to do a more scientific test, Susan, because the one time I mixed the Bitrex with wilt proof, it didn't seem to do anything. In fact, I tried some of it in my mouth and I couldn't, it was bitter, but not very, so I don't know.
Oh, it's strong enough that if you get a little whiff, a couple airborne grains in your mouth, I'm aware of it for an hour. I've been doing it for a couple years now. The Hardings bought a half pound, some commercial size, which was the smallest they could get, and divvied it up, and I swear by it. It doesn't seem to work as well on woodchucks, but rabbits and deer really dislike it.
It's worked well for me at times, but other times, depending, it doesn't.
Oh, no, I just buy whatever, recommended commercial deer spray there is. And those only last a week or two around here.
How much do you put in per gallon of the Bitrex, Susan?
Oh, I mix it right in the little spray bottle. So it's about 3/4 quart. And I take a table knife and very precisely take, a small amount and tip it in.
Okay.
If I'm feeling malicious, I tip in more. But
that's my approach too. I don't really, it changes over time.
but the wilt proof seems to keep it on the plant longer, which is useful.
That's probably a good sticker itself.
Yeah. But once they bite something with the Bitrex, they don't come back to that for at least a season.
What source of supply do you use for the Bitrex?
You get it on Amazon, and it takes.
Okay.
It's a bit bewildering to go and look, because it has, apparently its main use is testing surgical masks. So there are all sorts of preparations with all sorts of directions on how to do all sorts of complicated lab tests, which have no applicability to us. What the Hardings got was powder, which I find quite easy to use. A lot of the stuff comes in liquid form.
Oh, powder is better.
Well, I just find it useful. As I said, I'm very precise. I take a table knife and, scoop up a little on the tip. Probably, I shouldn't weigh it. So I should figure out how to calibrate it, because I do approximately the same thing each time, but it's hard to tell other people. I know what the little heap looks like on the tip of the knife.
Steve?
But be careful to rinse it off, because I find that stuff thoroughly unpleasant.
No, it is. Steve, can you look and see if there are any more people in the waiting room? We should.
I've been clicking them in pretty steadily here.
Oh,
Oh, we're up to 19. That's good.
oh, why am I not seeing that? Let's see. Look at that.
Yeah, because can you see the waiting room list?
No, I'm just seeing.
Okay.
I'm just seeing like six people here.
Huh.
You should be able to
Because-
see it. You're still listed as host, Joe.
Yeah, oh,
Yeah, and-
okay, I see I see the total, yes. Usually I see all of the actual icons. Okay, there it is now, yeah, okay. I'm gonna do some.
Because I think you'll need to admit people in when I start the lecture, because I won't have that on my screen then.
Okay, let's see.
Steve, I've got just you on my screen now and nobody else.
Go to the upper right and look at view and pick
Got 23 people on.
standard side by side or gallery.
Yeah, you don't just want me on your screen. That would be a rough start to the day.
Oh, I don't know.
So I see 20, yes, I see
Yeah.
23 people.
Right.
And no one's in the waiting room currently. Steve, if someone else comes in the waiting room, just let me know. And so I can make sure.
Okay, yeah, there's one there now, Jennifer Jones.
Yeah, I see her. Okay. I'll
Okay,
admit her.
I'll let you do that now.
Yeah.
Then, okay.
A lot of names I don't recognize.
Well, the Connecticut chapter is participating, so there may be a number of
Oh, good.
monikers here, but not familiar.
I'm from the Connecticut chapter.
Hi,
Hi.
Hi,
what's your
You at
name?
least- You have a picture at least.
Elaine Chittenden.
Hey, Elaine.
I'm from the Connecticut chapter too, Norma Savadio.
Hi, Norma. So we're up to 25 now. Let's see what time, just about, we'll give them another minute. Hey, Pete. And Ellie.
Species Botanical Garden, the silver and peril. Was silver and peril, and they were looking for.
So Steve, before you take over, I'm gonna mute everyone and then unmute you, and then I think you'll be good to go. All right. And
Yeah,
remind,
just let me know when you want me to start.
I think we can get going now. How many people do we have on here? 25, okay. All right, let me see if I can do this now. All participants. Okay, Steve, if you can hear me, I think you need to unmute.
I need to,
yourself.
yeah, okay.
Okay, good. I think we're ready to go.
All right. Do you want me to just start?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, well, before you do, let me just say, yeah, introduction wise. So today, we're going to have our main presentation, Steve Hootman. Following that, we'll have the announcements. And then after that, Susan Clark is going to give us a little mini program on how to enter a trust in the show. So we'll get started, as I say, with our main event, so Steve doesn't have to suffer through anything he doesn't want to. I'm sure he has other things. So today's speaker, today's presenter for the DeBurlo Endowed Lecture should be familiar to everyone. And because he's spoken to us 3 times previously. Steve is a well-known plant explorer, author, lecturer, and expert on the genus Rhododendron. He regularly goes on expeditions to study species in their natural habitats. Steve is executive director and curator of the Rhododendron Species Foundation and Rhododendron Species Botanical Garden, having worked there since 1992. The RSBG, with over 700 species of rhododendrons, is possibly the world's largest public collection of rhododendron species. The title of today's talk, if I have this right now, rather long one, is Cultivation of Rare Rhododendron Species, Some of Their Unusual Relatives, Cardiocrinum, Meconopsis, Meliodendron, and Other Fabulous Garden Plants. Welcome, Steve.
All right, thank you, Joe, and great to see everybody this afternoon or this morning for me. Kind of glad I opted not to fly out right now. Actually, it's kind of hectic at work right now, so pretty busy, but glad to be part of the group today and really great to see some old friends and familiar faces. So thanks for joining this morning. I just happen to have this in my office. That's something I'm working on, so I thought I'd show this quickly. It was collected in northern Burma before we start the lecture. Let's see if I can get this where you can see it. So it came in as Edgeworthii. Hold on, where is that? Oh, here we go. Came in as Edgeworthii, and the foliage does look like Edgeworthii, but it bloomed yellow, as you can see. So not Edgeworthii, but a close relative, Sanquencie, but quite different from the normal Sanquencie that we have in the collection here. So pretty spectacular plant, not hardy, unfortunately, but a nice new treat, and just shows kind of the variation in the genus. It's completely different from, we have Sanquencie from Kingdon Ward and from my own collections, and it looks very different other than the yellow flowers. There's some people in the waiting room there.
Yep, I just got them.
Okay, all right, so let's go ahead and get started. So yeah, today we're going to look at a lot of pretty pictures. Basically, I know you guys are just kind of starting into spring and everything. We're not far into it here either. It's been pretty cold, but we'll see a lot of pretty pictures today and talk about some cultivation and some of the methods we use out here. And why is that not advancing? Oh, here we go. Okay, so you can see my pointer, I think, correct? On the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so most rhododendron species, as well as a lot of the species magnolias and Meconopsis, cardiocrinum, come from Southeastern Asia. So Himalayas into China, down into Southeastern Asia. Rhododendrons occur primarily, probably 95% of rhododendrons occur Japan over to here into the Himalayas and down into just into northern Queensland. Down here you get the epiphytic Virea species, which are tropicals. Cardiocrinums are all across Southeastern Asia, and Meconopsis pretty much in the same area. So they all grow in the same region, but they are not cultivated the same, of course. So we'll look at that. So this is a very typical scene in northwestern Yunnan, the gorge of the Dulong. This is looking north into Tibet and Burma, and that is old growth coniferous forest. It looks a lot like what you'd see here. The difference being there, in these forests, you'll probably find 50 or 60 different species of rhododendron, whereas out here you just have a handful. So still some good country out there. Very typical rhododendron habitat. This is actually karst limestone in South Chongqing, a mountain called Jinfoshan. And two species of rhododendron are endemic here, which means they grow nowhere else. And they're right out on this edge where they're sort of protected, but where they can get out into the light. And obviously they have good drainage, which are two things we'll speak about a bit today, the drainage and the light. But that's very typical rhododendron habitat. You don't have to have a karst limestone mountain to grow these plants. They do quite well in the garden here for us, but that's where they like to grow in the wild. Very typical rhododendron habitat, especially in eastern and southern China. This is actually sandstone, so it is acidic with native Chinese hemlock. This is untouched country again. And the evergreen azaleas and different species of epiphytic rhododendron or lithophytic occur on these peaks. There's probably about 40 species in these mountains called the Daoshan, which is in eastern Guangxi. Yeah, here you go. So this is from the top of the tallest peak in that range, and it's these eroded sandstone peaks in every direction as far as you can see. Just incredible country, mostly unexplored, and still finding new species there all the time. We found several already just in 4 trips there. Now this is a raised upland meadow bog at about 10,000 feet in western Yunnan, and that is all Calostrodum in full bloom, which is quite striking. That's typical habitat for some of the Sayuanensia and Laponica or the alpine rhododendrons. And you think, well, how can you grow rhododendrons in a bog? I thought they needed good drainage, but in bogs, you'll find a lot of ericaceous plants, as well as other species, orchids, etc. And they're not really growing in the water. You see, they're all perched a little bit. So they're all on mounds of moss or peat moss. So they're not, the crown of the plant is not sitting in the water, but the roots have access to that water. So they never dry out, but also they have great drainage at the crown of the plant, which is very critical. And we'll talk about that a bit as well when we get into the actual cultivation part. So if you happen to have a cliff with a waterfall at 12,000 feet, some of the more difficult species can be quite easy, such as you see Lacteum here in northern Yunnan. And unfortunately, of course, none of us, or not many of us anyway, have that habitat. And so some of the actual species can be quite difficult in cultivation. So we go out of our way to try to provide the means for these things to stay alive. It's part of our job. It's our mission here. So you can go to Wumengshan and maybe get some lactium seed and bring it back. That's our propagation house. Hopefully you have some germination and grow those plants on. And in just 15 or 20 years, then you're looking at lactium out in the garden, which can be successfully cultivated. Lactium itself doesn't like heat. So that's when you can't, it's Italian, so you can't really do that back east. We struggle with it here as well. Basically because of heat, it needs light, but it doesn't like heat. So that can be a bit difficult in the garden, as you can imagine. But we'll start out with some perennials, the genus Meconopsis, and get back to rhododendrons a bit later. Meconopsis occur in a lot of the same mountains that you find rhododendrons in Asia. And they generally occur as forest plants, or more often subalpine or alpine meadows, where they have full sun, great drainage, but they don't dry out and it's nice and cool. So yes, most of them are very hard to grow. We have some success with what are called the Himalayan blue poppies. Here you see our blue poppy meadow, which will be at peak bloom if you're coming out for the ARS conference in early May. That's kind of the best time to see this. And we have
poppies.
Pardon?
He's talking about poppies.
Yeah. Was that a question? Okay. So these are the blue poppies. This is a strain called Lingholm, which is a bit more vigorous and comes true from seed. So you can see the blue poppies when you come out. But there are others. Sorry, this is a scan of a slide, a little blurry. This is a species called Meconopsis paniculata, which can be red, pale blue, yellow. This is in Sikkim, and the Meconopsis are not palatable to the yaks, and they come out quite early. So you often find quite a bit of Meconopsis that because everything else has been eaten by the yaks. A better image, this is the same species. And those winter rosettes last through the winter, basically. That's, other than when it blooms, that's when it looks the best. They look like this in the garden right now, and they look like that all winter. It's quite striking in the landscape. This is it in flower. So these are yellow. I keep these separate from the blue ones to get true seed. Quite nice. Not blue. Most people like the blue. This is another species. I've had this several times from seed. Pretty much impossible to grow in our climate. This is Meconopsis horridulus because of the spines on the stems and leaves, but beautiful. That's at about 15,000 feet in Tibet. Another one that's very difficult, also from Western China into the Himalayas. This is Meconopsis punicea, and that's it in full bloom. It doesn't flip up or turn over or anything. It's a hanging red bell, quite striking. I would love to be able to grow that. One of my favorites is Integrifolia, which again, I struggle with that here. It's just too warm in the summer, even here, but it is a stunning plant with giant deep yellow flowers, Meconopsis integrifolia, the lampshade poppy. This is Lingholm out in our own garden. So that's the one we can grow successfully. And we, like I said, we have about 500. I put 100 new ones out late summer every year to replace the ones that died, because I have some original clumps from 2008. Other ones live a year or two. It's just like people, basically. But that's a close-up. Stunning plant. It's a big draw for the garden. A way to get people in. Not everybody's interested in rhododendron species, but they'll come to see these and maybe develop an interest in the species themselves. And here it is at peak bloom, basically, mid-April to mid-June. We'll move on to cardiocrinums. So, cultivation of Meconopsis. So the issue with these is they don't like heat, they don't like competition, and they don't like to dry out. So if you can do that, even in our climate with cooler summers than what you would have, we recommend that people plant them in a bucket or an old sink or something and sink that into the ground with pure compost. They're heavy feeders, they don't like to dry out, and they don't want to be too hot. And yet they need a bit of light. So it's not really a woodland wildflower, but that's the way to grow these is no competition from tree roots, and don't let them dry out, basically. Same thing with the cardiocrinum. I have the Himalayan giant lilies planted in the same bed as you see here with the Meconopsis. Here are the Meconopsis rosettes just finishing in mid-June. And right when the blue poppies finish, the giant Himalayan lilies come into flower. They like the same conditions, moisture, rich soil, et cetera, et cetera. This is Atsuko. Some of you know Atsuko. She's been here about 10 years now. She's the propagator. And this one was our best one that year, 14.5 feet tall. So that's a pretty good sized lily, and they're quite fragrant. And again, like I said, they don't want to be too hot and they don't want to dry out. This is the form from China. So cardiocrinum occurs across the Himalayas into China. And in China, it becomes this variety called variety unionense, which has bronzy new growth that comes out about a month later in the season. So these aren't even showing yet, whereas the Himalayan cardiocrinum already has its foliage out in our climate. And they bloom about 2 weeks later as well, tend to be quite a bit shorter, but with a lot more color in the flower. So in Yunnan itself, they actually come out kind of a greeny yellow and eventually fade to white. But through most of China, and here you see variety unionense at the garden, quite a bit shorter. They come out with a lot of red, as you see here, versus the pure white or white with a little bit of red. And again, these don't overlap with the Himalayan variety. And I quite like these. They're very colorful, and the flowers are down at a level where you can actually smell them. Not too bad in the middle of June. And there you get an idea of the size of the flowers. I think you can, some of you maybe grow this in your climate. Anybody have luck with this, or?
I grow it.
Okay.
When the voles don't get it, I can grow it very well.
Right, they're very tasty, right? That's okay. What's going on now? Oh, there we go. Okay, even the spent stalks are quite attractive. Here you see them. This is in the middle of winter, and they have these like dinosaur or dragon-like fruits with teeth. Quite impressive. You come along and just shake those, and literally thousands of seeds come out. And if it's the right habitat, you'll get little babies in a couple of years. So in cultivation, again, the moist, rich soil, but this is the plant that bloomed that year, the original, what I call mother bulb, which then dies because it puts so much energy into that giant stalk and flowers and all that seed. But generally, if it's a good habitat, the daughter bulbs will form on the side, like on a lot of lilies. So you don't really lose the plant. Now, some people recommend going in and digging these up in the middle of winter and separating them. I never do that. We don't have the staff time for that anyway, but I don't find that it's necessary. You probably would get bigger plants doing that because there would be less competition, but you do not have to do that. So in a couple of years, these will bloom and die, but at the same time, they're forming daughter bulbs. So again, we have clumps that are 15 years old now that just bloom every year. Some of the plants that occur that would like to occur in the same habitat. So again, somewhat sunny, rich, moist soil. Of course, the primulas. This is Primula pulverulenta. This is Iris silver edge, which is a Siberica. But any primula, basically, especially the japonica types or the candelabras, and the Siberian iris, probably most iris actually, like these same conditions. So here you see the rosette of the Himalayan giant lily growing alongside all these other really beautiful flowering plants. These we call companion plants at the garden, just to add a little interest in and amongst the rhododendrons. Another set, this is a great combo. This is Iris chrysographes, which is another Siberica type, and Primula prolifera from the Himalayas. And those bloom at the same time and like the same conditions. So really great color combo. Another great primula, this one's from Sichuan, Primula secundiflora with these almost purple flowers, but I really like the Pharanos black and white calyces. It's a really beautiful flower. Now we'll move on to rhododendrons and talk about that a bit. So light, that's a battle here that we are constantly fighting, and I would imagine many of you have the same issue. Rhododendrons do like quite a bit of light, but they don't generally like a lot of heat. So finding that balance and maintaining it when you're dealing with 170-foot tall conifers can be a bit of a challenge. And sometimes we just go in and have to take out some of the conifers. So I took out 4 thuya or western red cedars and a big native hemlock here. and really opened this zone up. See, here's the native salal that was growing underneath. This is an area we now call the May garden, which is planted with deciduous azaleas and May blooming species and hybrids. It's quite different looking and full sun now. But that's a constant battle of keeping the trees thinned enough to let enough light in, but also with our ever more hotter summers. We hit 108 last year for a couple of days, which was fun. You don't want them to be too baked and hot in the afternoon. So trying to keep that balance going with your tree canopy is one of the big challenges here. But if you're successful, you get great results. This is Amelanchier, of course, the white cherry relative, Pemicoense in front. This is the alpine garden down below the gazebo. Many of you have been here before. In the past 20 years, I've probably taken out 100 trees in this zone right here. And nobody complained that we took all the trees up because we still have a lot of trees. But the light is much better now. We had pin oaks and European larch and all this crap growing all through here, just way too much shade. You'd be shocked if you saw the old photos. So reducing that overhead canopy and the tree root competition as well, very important. But again, also giving them some shade in the afternoon, the flowers last longer, you have less stress, et cetera, et cetera. So again, that's part of the challenge of growing rhododendron species in particular. But if done properly, you get good results like this. There's Davidsonianum, Irroratum, an evergreen azalea, Yedoense, I think, growing down below. Again, these are in shade in the afternoon or light shade, but get quite a bit of light throughout the day. Quinquefolium, another one, you don't want to have that out in full sun. Even here, we'll get in mid-April, maybe a day in the 70s. And if you grow quinquefolium, or have seen that, it's Japanese corkbark azalea. That's it in glorious full bloom. The flowers are paper thin, and they'll go down in a day or two when it gets hot, if it's out in the sun. At the same time, you don't get the great fall color. The leaves turn bright red in the fall if it doesn't have enough light. So again, just finding that balance. But same thing here. This is a planting right up by the gift shop. And I use this to illustrate or show people up at the shop even that yes, deciduous azaleas and Augustinii and plants like that do like a lot of light. But this is right in the Doug fir forest and they still do well. You're not going to get as great a fall color on the golden comet, but it will grow and you'll get flowers. And those flowers last a lot longer and the plant is less stressed. And so you have less lace bug issues, hopefully, et cetera, et cetera. Same thing here. The big leaves want a lot of light, but they don't want to get baked in the afternoon. I know you can't really do many of the big leaves there, maybe some of the hybrids, but even here in our climate, you don't want big leaves out in hot afternoon sun, basically. They'll survive, but they'll get foliage scorch, they'll be stressed, and the leaves will shrink because they don't need to be this big to catch all the sunlight, see? So in the shade, the leaves are bigger because they still need that light, but you don't have the stress. So species like Rex here underplanted. So that's all our native Doug fir in the background, which is a great conifer for us to garden under. The cedars and hemlocks are a complete nightmare, but Doug fir has a really nice deep root system. Underplanted with the ostrich fern and polygonatum. That's a newer form of Rex. So these are from further east, new collections we have. This is my collection from 95 in Sichuan, which have quite a bit of color. So much better than the old white with a purple blotch, I think, anyway. And those will be in full bloom for the conference as well. There's a good bud set on Rex this year. So that'll be one of the highlights for sure. Another great one that we grow here is Sinophalconeri. That's a relatively new intro from North Vietnam, South Yunnan. And they range from kind of this creamy white to a good solid yellow. And we get 18 inches of growth a year here. Some of my original collections from 95 are probably 25 feet tall now and just going to town. That's proven to be a really hardy one for us anyway. Okay, so how do we grow rhododendrons out here? In our cool maritime Mediterranean climate, drainage. So people bring plants in, they're having issues, their plant is dying, blah, blah, blah. And most of the staff now knows the simple answer, drainage, and then you turn around and walk away. No, I'm kidding, but that is kind of the main thing, drainage. And most of you have been doing this for a long time, you know this. But even here where we have kind of old glaciated soil, so it's not really great soil through most of the garden. And then of course they came in and logged it out and destroyed it all and dumped sawdust on top of it and blah, blah, blah. You all know about that out here. We've been fighting that for 30 years. So what we do now, and I'll show you examples of this, but sorry for, I'm not a very good artist here, but basically we bring in a coarse sand gravel bark mix, which is this bit, and build raised beds under the dug firs or wherever it might be. And to give the plant something to hold on to, that sand never goes away and you are guaranteed the drainage you need. So with a raised bed of coarse sand, you're going to get good drainage. The rhododendrons have that forever, basically. And even then, so here's the raised bed level, right? So across, 100 yards or whatever in a new bed. Then when we're actually planting the rhododendron, I make a mound and plant, oops, how did I do that? Okay. I build a small mound and plant on top of that mound even. So the crown of the plant is 2, 3, even 4 inches above grade of the raised bed, because you're going to have settling. You're going to have Doug fir needles and rhododendron leaves and Doug fir cones come down and swallow this trunk eventually. There's a label right here with a wire. 10 years later, the mulch soil levels up here and your label is buried. So to help alleviate that, we plant on a mound to give us even better drainage, if that makes sense. And you think, well, I don't want little mountains of rhododendrons out in my garden, but the way we get around that is you then bring in your mulch, which is our own chips from Doug fir branches, blah, 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 thinning out branches. We have chipped up by the arborist a couple times a year and let that sit for a year or two. And then we bring that in. So out here, it's 3 or 4 inches deep and it's level. So by the time you get to the mound, it's only about 1 inch deep because you don't want to bury the crown of that plant. See, that's important. So then the roots end up growing basically in this transition zone between the sand and the organic mulch, which turns into really good soil. That's where all the physiology is happening. That's where the oxygen is. That's where the food is. So the roots will end up going in this zone where the two things are transitioning into each other, if that makes sense. So the roots are all going this way. So they're not buried in mulch, et cetera, but the crown of the plant, again, is on that little mound. And what you want is for those roots to go out into the good stuff. So that's basically how we do it. Not everybody has to do it that way, but that's what works for us. This is what we use as our quote soil. There was no loam or anything there, which is sort of an issue here. That's good and bad. We have a lot less issues with fungal and bacterial and virus pathogens because our soil is so nutrient poor, which I know that doesn't make sense, but rhododendrons don't need a lot of nutrition, but they do need some. But you think if you're adding, so when we plant, we put down, a couple of handfuls of fertilizer or whatever. But after the first year or two, we don't do that any longer because you're disrupting the natural cycle of whatever's growing in that soil. Basically, it's artificial and there's all kinds of stuff happening here. We don't need that. The rhododendrons are quite happy. They recycle their own nutrients once they get going, dropping their leaves, et cetera, et cetera. And if you think of where they grow in the wild, like that lacteum at the beginning is growing on a vertical cliff in moss. So it's not deep, rich tomato soil. They don't need that. They don't like that. Everybody else likes that, is my point. So if we were to dump tons of inorganic or even organic fertilizer on here every year, which is a lot of nitrogen, everybody eats nitrogen. Rhododendrons, bacteria, pathogens, fungi, everybody's going to come in and go for that nitrogen and whatever else is in that fertilizer, which can lead to problems. If your rhododendron is not really happy, then there are all these could be or would be pathogens in your soil. And so we avoid that by trying to keep it fairly sterile, if that makes sense. I know it's counterintuitive, but so here's a raised bed going in. We had a big ice storm, lost a ton of trees through here. which was kind of a blessing in the end, opened it up. The soil was not great. So we brought in again the sand, build a big raised bed, plant directly into that. Here's another spot. You see under the dug firs, you have to be careful about not smothering the tree roots, but you know, it's sand and we don't put it on that thickly. This is a corner down. You'll see across from the big leaves is full of platypodum, Uephengensi, and all kinds of cool things now, which look really marvelous. That's our own chips, what we call chips. So we have a lot of tree work done, obviously. Dug fir branches come down constantly in windstorms. Some of them are, 10 inches across at the base. They're huge branches. All that gets chipped up. We let it sit for a year or two. So you have a good mix of brown and green. And that again feeds the plants as that breaks down naturally. Rhododendrons can be moved, as you all know. This is a big Hemsleyanum on the forks of the tractor. That plant's doing quite well now. I don't recommend, after doing this for 30 years now and moving a lot of big plants, yes, they move. Some of them move quite successfully, but most of the larger plants that are not super vigorous, of course, Hemsleyanum's a Fortunia, which is really vigorous, but we moved a lot of big lacteums back in 1997, and they looked great for years. And then looking at photos I take every year in the garden, I realized they were going downhill every year since we moved them. Half of them are dead now. So yeah, they did move, but they sure weren't happy about it. And now we've lost most of them. It took a long time, but another thing, rhodies can be quite resilient. These are some of our old growth or original rhododendron species Fortunii, which are 25, 30 feet tall. So this is an original planting in the garden back when they were planting in sawdust. So they're basically a pancake of roots sitting on hard pan in rotten sawdust. But Fortunia is pretty tough, so they've lived. Most of the species in the garden died a long time ago in that situation, but the Fortunia lived. But we had a big, wet, heavy snow about 3 or 4 years ago, and there's nothing for those roots to hang on to. And the 4 of these big guys just tipped right out with their root balls, you see. So I thought, well, okay, I can clear this out, make some really good firewood and put new soil in and start over, or we can just pull these bad boys back up and keep our nice little grove of giant Fortunias, which is what I decided in the end. So we got the tractor and a come along, and I got a few tons of Cascade basalt dumped on site, and we pulled those guys up, propped them up, and dumped a bunch of basalt on their roots, and they're doing fine. So we're able to save those big old plants. Hopefully that'll keep them from tipping out again. Rhododendrons can be pruned. This isn't at the RSF, friend of mine, but bit rough. It's probably better just to start over with a new plant that fits the site better, but you can do it. One factor, rough barked rhododendrons, which are most of them, can be pruned. Don't prune smooth barked rhododendrons. So you don't grow many of those back east anyway, but they do not, they don't respond well. Really brushy things like trifloras, or here's a micronulatum. Shrubby brushy things can be cut back hard. We had basically lost a path from micronulatum and doricum getting tall and rangy and growing over the path, and I just went in with a chainsaw and knocked them all back and redid the path, and it's quite beautiful now. They've responded quite well. So many of them, yeah, azaleas, that sort of thing, respond well to that. So I could do a whole lecture on competition with rhododendron species. We'll just cover it briefly. Many of the species are difficult because they are not competitive. They grow in very specific habitats in the wild. And if those habitats aren't exactly what they want, they fade out or they migrate to a new spot and they're outcompeted by something else that's a bit more aggressive. So things like this Valentinianum affinity from northern Vietnam, exposed rocks, that sort of thing. So in the garden, we have to be careful where we plant that. This one obviously is in a pot, but I've struggled to keep this one going in the garden, even though it's hardy, because it's just not very competitive. So a lot of the epiphytic or lithophytic species don't really have a strong root system, because they've evolved for a very specific habitat. And where they have that habitat, they do well and they can compete, or actually there's nothing usually competing with them. So when you put them into a woodland garden or that sort of thing, they're just not quite competitive enough. And so they need specialized habitats like forestii. So we take advantage of old stumps as often as possible. Here's a repens just growing in a rotten old stump. Perfect. It gets the drainage at once. There's no tree root competition. That inner rotten wood never really dries out. So it's basically the same habitat that this plant would be living in the wild. I mean, it's not the same habitat, but the same conditions, I should say. Proteoides, here it is in front of the terrace. This probably will be finished by the time the conference happens. But I have 3 big, beautiful proteoides in a raised bed of coarse sand, and there are no trees. But it gets shade from 2 o'clock in the afternoon on by the conservatory itself, which is right here. And so I'm able to successfully grow and even flower proteoides, which is a very difficult species otherwise, because again, it has no tree root competition. It gets shade in the afternoon and it has perfect drainage. And of course we water it. This is a plant called Dachengensi, which comes from the Dioshan, that sandstone mountain range I showed you earlier. Took me 4 trips to find that. But again, that's a very specific habitat. It grew on vertical sandstone cliffs. I actually have this in that same bed as the proteoides, and they're doing quite well. So they might be in bloom when you're out. They're blooming quite young. They're about this big around, but they flowered last year. So looks like we're going to be able to grow that. That's a new species in Taliensia from southeastern China in the subtropics. And don't get me started on that one. Okay, epiphytes. So rhododendrons, there are many, many obligate epiphytes, which means they only grow as epiphytes. But there are also many species that, if the conditions are right, they will grow as epiphytes just because they can. And as an epiphyte, then you don't have the competition because you're up in the top of a tree. So you're not competing with the conifer roots or maple roots or whatever. And you obviously have really great drainage. And if you're in the wet enough climate, which is the kicker, then you don't dry out. So I've seen on the Salween, on the Yunnan-Burma border, one hemlock even with a giant fulvum and a giant Sano Grande growing out of the top. So those are typically forest plants that grow down in the soil underneath the conifers. But if it's moist enough, yeah, they'll grow up in the top of a tree. I wouldn't try that here because we're a Mediterranean climate, but a lot of the Medenias and things like that are epiphytes in the wild, obligate epiphytes even. This is one of my new favorites called Lavinii, which has been super hardy for us so far for a Medenia. It's dwarf and compact, big white bells and they're quite fragrant. And again, really hardy. Not necessarily for you guys, but that's the new foliage, Lavinii. This is Sankuensi, which is the yellow one I showed at the beginning. This is the typical form from the Salween. This one from Burma, which is not that far away, that I showed at the beginning. Here, I'll just show you the leaf again. This is the leaf of the new one, which see very thin indumentum, quite different. But obviously the flowers are the same species. So always a mystery. Excellens, this is basically Natalia, which is a really tender 6-inch flowered Himalayan species. Beautiful thing we grow in the conservatory, but Excellence comes from South Yunnan, North Vietnam, and has been bone hardy for us outside here anyway. So it's basically a hardy version of Natalia, but these all require really superb drainage because they are epiphytic or lithophytic in the wild. And so you have to give them even more drainage. In pots is a good way to grow these. If you have somewhere where you can put the plants when it's really cold in the winter. Even here, I grow a lot of these in containers like Natalia. And then when the temperature is going to go below 20 or whatever, I just shove them in the garage for a couple days. And they do quite well. The epiphytes, again, the trick with those is they don't have an aggressive, strong root system, and it takes them a while to get established. So some of you maybe have ordered some of these from us, like a Mupanense, and it's really wobbly on its roots. It takes a long time to get a good root system on the epiphytes. But they're super tough and fairly drought tolerant, or resistant, I should say, when they do get a good root system. Because if you grow on the side of a tree, at some point in your life, you're going to have a week or two with no rain, even on the salween. And so you have to have some way of surviving that. So if you can get a good root system on an epiphyte in a pot, it will be super easy to grow, super tough, and you'll actually get flowers a lot more and a lot sooner. Like a Natalii, if I could plant those outside here, would probably take 20, 25 years to flower. It would want to be a 20-foot tree with that superb bark before it would flower. In a pot, you can get flowers in 5 or 6 years, because you're going to fill that container with roots, just like an orchid. And that Natalii is going to say, oh, this is all I can do. I better start making babies. See? So whereas in the ground, it's going to say, I need to get 20 feet tall and be dominant and start blooming. But in a pot, it'll trigger itself basically to say, okay, I can't grow anymore because there's no more root space. So I better start producing, basically. Edgeworthii is another one. We do have a couple of hardy forms of this, but in general, that's a bit tender, but a really great species. That's the form right up by the shop if you come out this spring, the Bodnant or Award of Merit, or what we call the hardy form. Dalhousie rhabdotum, of course, that's another one I grow at home in a container, and we grow in containers here. It's also in the conservatory. That's only hardy to probably 20 or 15, so I can't really do that outside. Blooms in early summer, spectacular flowers, of course. Believe me, if we could grow that outside, I'd have a whole forest of that. That would be spectacular. But again, those are all epiphytes. I grow that in a container. It blooms great for me every year. Likes it outside, other than the really cold snaps we get once in a while. Another way to do that, you might have old stumps, or as we did, we brought in 9 truckloads of stumps back in 2009 and put in the Victorian stumpery, which is right up from the pond, if you know the garden. This was several years ago now, actually. So it's a lot thicker with ferns and moss now. It's some of this wood you can't even see any longer. There's stridulosum, which is blooming right now for us. Here you see Adiantum venustum, just cascading down all this old wood. That's a way to grow things that need drainage, or things that are epiphytic, is if you have old rotten stumps and things. That's exactly where they grow in the wild, an old snag or an old stump. Here's part of the stumpery again. This is about a week away. So this is the Magnolia Grove with Coralopsis. Normally that would look like this right now, but we've been pretty cold. Yeah, these old rotten logs and things. So now we can plant, these are far enough along in decomposition, we can plant ferns and rhododendrons and agapetes and stuff on these old logs. Just another shot with the new growth coming out on Melotum. There's Eximium, which is coming into bloom right now. This is in early May. This is what it'll look like for anybody who's coming out to the conference. So again, this happened to be an old stump that was already rotten enough that I could plant things directly into it. Here you see a pyrosia, and this is Sargentianum, which is a little anthopogon relative with yellow flowers that grows on limestone cliffs in Sichuan, and it's quite difficult. So I thought, well, let's just try it. And I shoved it into this old stump, into old rotten woods, and it's old rotten wood. That's our best specimen. So a plant from limestone cliffs thriving on an old rotten stump. Did not read the book. This is a little Boothii on an old cedar stump. So that'll root into that old rotten wood. Again, once the roots get inside where it's, the stump's big enough where the moisture is maintained throughout the year, perfect. Probably don't even have to water it anymore. That's a Sino Grande. This is another old stump that I already had on site. In the stumpery, I stuck a Sino Grande. That thing's doing great. So it's growing out of the middle of this old stump. And Edgeworthii. This is exactly where you would see Edgeworthii in the wild. I've seen that many times. It's always on an old snag branch up in a tree or an old stump or log like this. And that plant is really, really happy. That's an Edgeworthii hybrid from Glendoick called Plover. Edgeworthii crossed Dendrocaris, if I remember correctly. Anyway, sweet little thing, but again, its parents are epiphytic, and it's just growing in this old stump. Beautiful thing. The tropical species, most of those are epiphytic as well. The best way to grow those is to build a conservatory. If you can't do that, and most of us can't, then you can grow them in containers just like the non-tropical species, like the Medenias and things. But we were fortunate enough to be able to put one of these in back in 2010. And so now we can show the tropical epiphytic species called Bireas, tropical rhododendrons. This is a plant called Blackie Eye. And so we have great luck in the conservatory, keeping these tropical species alive. It's a bit of an eye opener for people, I think, in the middle of winter when a lot of these are blooming and it's just dark gray and 35 degrees and rainy, and they see the conservatory full of flowers and they go in and think, well, we can go in there and warm up, but it's 35 degrees in there. We just keep it from freezing because these plants are all from the high mountains, or most of them anyway, and they don't want to be too hot and they need that cool to stay healthy, but also to flower. So it's not really a lot warmer in there generally, but you are out of the rain. Brookianum, that's blooming right now. Beautiful thing. Stenophyllum and Taxifolium, that's from the Philippines. So these are some of the species you can see in the conservatory. Another epiphyte that we have great luck with, a lot of orchids, of course, most of you know, are epiphytic in the wild, especially in the tropics. Pleone orchids, so little windowsill orchids. This is Pleone formosana, which has proven to be pretty hardy for us. We grow that outside. So basically the bulbs, they go dormant in the winter. You see here, that was one at one time, but they bulk up. And then the leaves come out after the flowers, it grows, it produces more bulbs, and then the leaves fall off and it goes dormant. So they don't like to be soggy, wet, and freezing. So I had the idea of sticking them underneath these crevices with the rock overhangs to keep them from being too wet in the winter. And that's worked really well. So this is the rock wall in front of the conservatory. And this is several years ago. This thing is just a solid mass of Pleones now all at once. It's really a stunning display. There you see what they do eventually. So they just bulk up if they're happy. Okay, we'll look at some companion plants for rhododendrons, or things that we use anyway, just for some ideas. This is one that I really like. This is the European version of what you all would call ramps, right? The allium from the mountains. This is Allium ursinum, which does really well for us and spreads by seed. It's not weedy, it dies down by June anyway, but a beautiful thing in mid-spring, just to kind of naturalize in our Doug fir forest. Erasemas, of course, do really well. This one is hardy for you guys, even Erasema cicoquianum. Some of the woodland peonies I really like using. This is Peonia marii, which is our introduction from Sichuan. That's naturalized in the garden, so they come up all over the place, but they're, it's beautiful, who cares? Ypsilandra tibetica is another one that does really well for us. It likes the same conditions as the rhododendrons. That's an evergreen lily. That's in bloom right now. It usually blooms late February, March, and the white spikes come out and they have blue anthers and are incredibly fragrant on a somewhat warm day, even 15 feet away. Just in beautiful fragrance. And again, evergreen, Ypsilandra. I've been into gesneriads, hardy gesneriads anyway, since I've been going to Eastern and Southern China the last 15 years or so, and realized a lot of these plants were growing right up with the maples and rhododendrons, so they probably have some hardiness, and it turns out a lot of them do, especially this one, which I collected in Hebei, which is Brixia speciosa. That's been in the catalog. Maybe some of you ordered that. That's it in bloom. Those flowers are about at least 2 inches long. A really stunning hardy gesneriad, evergreen foliage, of course. So gesneriad is African violet family. So these are basically hardy African violet relatives. And we grow quite a few of those out in the garden now. Davidia, the dove tree, that's a good companion plant for rhododendrons. They occur naturally together in the wild. Of course, beautiful flowers. Everybody loves the dove tree. That blooms in, that'll probably be in bloom when you're out for the conference, actually, or starting to anyway. Another one that most people aren't familiar with, but that we use, I have probably a half a dozen of these in the garden. is an ancient relic called tetracentron. And this is another one of those kind of like ginkgo or what the hell, Cercidiphyllum, where it's the only plant remaining in its family and in its genus. So it's kind of just this leftover from a long time ago. And this species or this genus actually has some conifer elements, so some gymnosperm elements. Really interesting thing. It's amentiferous, so it has catkins, and they'll get up to 200 feet tall in the wild. I've seen them in the Himalayas all the way down into Vietnam through China. Beautiful plant. The leaves turn butter yellow with brown veins, or no, brown with yellow veins in the fall. Just a really spectacular foliage plant. Grows with rhododendrons in the wild. Magnolias, of course, grow with rhododendrons in the wild as well. We use those extensively. Magnolias are fantastic, but they do grow together with the rhodies in the wild. So at the RSF, I try to focus on plants that grow with rhododendrons naturally in the wild. A, it looks better, and B, they like the same conditions. So it makes our lives a bit easier. Magnolias fortunately fall into that group. This is Magnolia hypoluca or aboveda, which is the Japanese big leaf magnolia. And we have a grove of those from wild seed up at the top of the garden, which are a highlight for most people coming into the garden. They're really spectacular. We use a lot of Styraceae. A, they grow with rhodies in the wild, and B, they don't get too large and they're not too competitive. And C, they mainly bloom in May, when a lot of the species are already finished, but when most people come to visit us. So it gives a bit of color in May to go with the fading Thomsonii you see in the background here, which was in April. And they're spectacularly beautiful. So we do have a big Styraceae collection, including, of course, Styrax itself here. This is a species from Guizhou, which we have in the garden, which I've keyed out now to Odoratissimus, which is in mid-June, actually. That one's a bit later. This is one of my favorite new ones, and we're propagating this. This is now a 25, 30-foot tall tree called Pterostyrax levelinii. And that's from seed I collected in 2010, and it's already 30 feet tall. Beautiful thing. That's in late May, and those are foot-long fragrant clusters of hanging fringed bells. And the branches are completely horizontal. It's like a Christmas tree with these foot-long panicles hanging down. Just a stunning thing. That's upper meadow. So that's Pterostyrax leveliniana. Alnophyllum is another one we grow. That's from China as well. Really big flowers, not in masses, but large flowers. And my favorite, the Rhododendron, Joe mentioned at the beginning. That's pretty much my favorite flowering tree. Back in 2009, I think, I found this for the first time, didn't know what it was in China. It was in full bloom. The most spectacular flowering tree I've ever seen anywhere in the world. Big, huge tree covered with these giant pink parasols that hang down. So I have probably 7 or 9 of these planted out in the garden now. This is our best pink form, which we're naming and propagating. So we'll have that available, but really stunning flowering tree. Big, giant pink bells. That's Rhododendron. Hemimelidaceae also occurs with rhododendrons in the wild. That's a great ornamental family. You guys grow hemimelis and all kinds of things as well. Father Gilla. This is Disanthus from China. And one of my favorites, it starts coloring like this in August, and that goes into November. So we have color on these plants. It's actually almost in gorgeous full bloom. It has little tiny red hemimelis-like flowers, but a spectacular foliage plant. Disanthus. And a lot of other Hemimelidaceae. That's one of our big subgroups here in the garden. Most of you are familiar with that family. And of course, other ericaceous plants grow with rhododendrons in the wild, and they like the same conditions. And that's our main sub collection here in the garden, other than the genus rhododendron itself. So we do a lot of Anchianthus, of course. This is Cerulatus, which is coming into flower right now. So it's the really early, always pure white one that blooms before the leaves. Whereas almost all the other Anchianthus bloom in May, of course, after the leaves have emerged. Cerulatus, my favorite one. Leaves turn bright red in the fall. This is a form of Deflexus, which is quite variable, but always beautiful. That blooms in May. This is Enkianthus chinensis, which again is really variable on one mountain. Even I've seen the red, pure yellow, pink, white, striped, all growing on one mountain, quite variable. Menziesias, of course, are spectacular. Of course, Menziesii has been lumped into the genus Rhododendron. So this was Menziesii cilia calyx, which was wild collected in Japan, and a very strange collection because these are in bloom right now in March and have creamy yellow flowers, whereas all the other Menziesii that I have from Japan bloom in May with purple or pink flowers. So a really exciting collection. Unfortunately, really hard to propagate this plant, which we're naming a couple of the best forms, but it just does not go from cuttings for some reason. But that now would be Rhododendron benhallii. Same here. This is typical cilia calyx. This is one I named 25 years ago from Japan, which is a really dwarf compact one with deep green leaves, really dwarf habit, but the biggest flowers of any Menziesii that we have, called plum drops. We sell that occasionally. Again, the Menziesias are fairly difficult to root, and the voles and the rabbits love them. So they go into the hoops, and you finally get some to root and get it up to gallon size. And one night they're all chewed to the base. So that's why we don't have them in the catalog very often. Gaultherias, of course, are great companion plants. This is Gaultheria forestii from China, great fruit. This is a new species I found on the sow wing called Gaultheria pseudonotabilis, beautiful foliage with the red bristles. And of course, Leucothoe. This is one you guys have out in your woods, Leucothoe racemosa. So that's a great plant for us. Black smooth stems, beautiful flowers in May. Most of you probably know that, swamp sweet bells. And of course, the agapetes. That's a group I've been really into for a long time. Most of those we grow in the conservatory. The Vietnamese species, and I don't have time to get into all that either, but the Vietnamese species are actually proving to be hardy for us outside. Most of them aren't this spectacular, unfortunately, but this is how I grow agapetes at home. This is in my backyard, just in a hanging basket, moss lined, right? So you pack a bunch of moss in and then put some barky soil in, and that plant's been in that for years and years and years. And you know that dries out quite a bit occasionally. But like I said, once it has a good solid root system and it has this lignotuber, which agapetes have, which holds water. Once you have a healthy established root system, they're pretty tough. And this just stays outside all winter unless we get an Arctic blast, and then I hang it inside the shed. So that's the way you can do a lot of the more difficult species. Even the alpine species thrive in these conditions because no competition. They have the drainage, et cetera, and root weevils can't get to it, which is another bonus. So there you see the lignotubers. So the agapetes have this as again, they grow up in the tops of trees, but it does dry out occasionally, and they have water reserves here. This is Agapetes oblonga. This is a blueberry, actually, Vaccinium pseudoboletum from Vietnam, which we do grow outside. I have a big specimen. It came through the, what did we hit? 16 degrees in December with no damage. So pretty excited about that. Big evergreen blueberry with red flowers. This one I can't do outside, unfortunately. It's from the Himalayas, but one of my very favorites. Beautiful foliage and the little white bells with the pink blush. And then you get a big white, smooth blueberry following that. Completely white. Yeah, there it is. This is one of the Vietnamese species called Agapetes malapoensis. And, you know, it's nice. It's the white with the green tip. And those are, 1.5 inches long. But I can grow that outside if it's on a stump or something with drainage. And then you get a red berry. I think I have, yeah. Then you get a red blueberry when they form fruit, which is kind of fun. This is Ludgvan Cross, which we grow as well. That's a hybrid from Britain. We're doing our own hybrids here now. And I've come up with some pretty spectacular ones. And then this is just Serpens, which is the old standard Agapetes that's been in cultivation since Hooker found it in Sikkim back in the 1850s. And until recently was kind of the only one you could get. And I had a big, beautiful specimen. They're very pendulous in a hanging basket on my balcony. And one year, for some reason, it formed fruit, which I have never seen again and had never seen before. So I have these long hanging chains of foliage covered with these purpley blueberries. Really cool. Haven't seen it since. Smithiana, a good yellow one. Unknown species from the Himalayas. I haven't been able to key out. Just showing you some of the variety. These are blueberries, basically. That's Lacei and Miniata, which is the most spectacular one. This blooms from August to Christmas in the conservatory, and you'll get over 20 flowers per truss. And they're about, well, you can see 2 inches long, just spectacular, but not hardy outside. It's a good way to grow orchids as well. This is my own, this is Sologeny. And again, they grow just like the epiphytic rhododendrons, so a moss-lined hanging basket. And you can keep that going for years and years and years without having to repot it or do anything. And again, you're up off the ground, so you don't have to worry about insects. And of course, drainage is never an issue. Cymbidium hookerianum from Sikkim, same thing. Lysionotus, this is another hardy gesneriad. So this is Lysionotus pauciflorus, which is an evergreen creeping subshrub. And I love Lysionotus. This one's bone hardy for us anyway. I actually have this growing out in the garden. But at home, I grow it in these orchid baskets, or these water lily baskets, actually. And this is several years ago, but now it moves by underground runners. And so the entire basket has stems with leaves coming out. So when it blooms, it's just this big puff of pale blue flowers coming out of the bottom and the sides. Fantastic. There are the flowers. Lysionotus pauciflorus, worth trying in a sheltered spot. This is an Aescananthus, same thing. I bought this fancy ball thing and packed moss in there, dumped bark down the middle, and then stuck these Aescananthus cuttings in. And now the whole thing is just this mass, because Aescananthus, again, runs. So it sends runners out through all these openings, and just is a really cool big mass of flowers. But Aescananthus generally aren't hardy outside, except for this one, which you'll see. This is up at the top of the garden. This is Aescananthus buxifolius from northern Vietnam. I've had that outside for years and years. So it's in our climate again, not for you guys, but for us, that's really exciting to have a hardy gesneriad Aescananthus. And it's now, this is an old rotten Doug fir stump, which now there are shoots of Aescananthus coming out of gaps in the bark all through here. So in a few years, that's just going to be a big mass of Aescananthus. And that's exactly where I collected this in Vietnam, on top of an old stump. There are the flowers. So again, I don't mean to taunt people with things you can't grow. I'm just showing you some of the cool stuff that we're doing out here, and showing you some color as we head into spring, get everybody all excited. Failure and success, they often go hand in hand. True enough. So here is a Virea from 14,000 feet in Papua New Guinea that grows in sphagnum peat bogs. That's one of our guides there, who I wasn't supposed to rip up a chunk, but he did. But see, it has these long woody runners and literally grows in the bog. So we had to wade in ankle deep water just to go photograph this. Successfully got seed. I think we had over 80 seedlings up to band size a couple of years later, and have been losing them ever since. This is one of the last ones. So this is in the conservatory. So it does come from 14,000 feet, but it's still tropical and can take some frost, but we can't grow that outside permanently anyway. So we had the idea, here's an old hypertufa trough. Just filled it with live sphagnum and stuck the plant in, and then have it sitting in the stream in the conservatory. We have a little stream with waterfalls through the middle of the conservatory. So this hypertufa then wicks, along with the sphagnum, wicks the water up. So again, the plant's not sitting in water, but it never dries out. And I thought, if this doesn't keep it alive, then there's no way we can keep this plant alive. It lived a year. We don't have any Saxifragoides anymore. We started out with 80. So even this didn't work. So some of them you just can't grow. And that's the way it goes. And we have to live with that. It's too bad, but you know, might never have that species again, but we tried everything we could just to keep it alive. It's our mission, but just couldn't do it. Whereas sometimes you do have success. This is Falconeri, and this is from seed I collected in 1997 in the Himalayas, finally blooming for the first time, probably 20 years later. So yes, I had to wait 20 years, but the plant's alive and it's beautiful, and I would call that a success. Same with Kasangi. This is from seed collected with Ken Cox in Runachel in 2003. I only had to wait 15 years for that. Quite a success. Beautiful thing. So that's Kasangi. And we'll wrap it up there. So thank you all for your attention.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
Yeah, you bet.
I'm going to unmute everyone, so I'm sure they'll have some questions for you. I believe I have to do this individually to everyone, but if you find you can unmute yourself, please do so. It's taking a second to go down through our 33 participants here.
Yeah, and again, sorry for throwing so much in terms of names and everything at you, but it was more just to kind of stimulate your gardening, and maybe you'll come out and see some of this material in the flesh this spring or next year or whatever. And I'm sorry, Susan, I didn't have time to put a slide list together. It's just been, we're short a couple of people right now in the middle of spring, and it's just a nightmare. So anyway, yeah, happy to answer any questions if anybody has any. If not, great to see folks again. And hopefully we'll see some of you out here this spring.
Well,
It's a pretty good bud set this year.
that's good to hear. I have a couple of questions if no one else does, for sure, but I'm still.
I do. I have one question that I can think of. The thing that jumps out to me on the rotten stumps, they're all conifer stumps, right? Every single one?
Right.
Okay, because in the east, they're all mostly deciduous where I am anyway.
Right.
And they rot so totally differently. They don't, from the inside out, I think they're rotting, not from the.
Yeah, no,
outside in.
that's how the conifers go as well. And it is a slightly different substrate, but it will still work. Most of the stumpery, actually, where we're growing a lot of this material, are actually, a lot of that is maple and alder. Yeah, and we're having great success there as well. So it doesn't have to be conifer. I just happened to show mostly conifer because that's mostly what we have out here. But yeah, anything works. Basically, it's just a well-drained media, with no competition. So that's kind of one of the main gists of the lecture really is. The more competitive species that are easier to grow are the ones that grow in forest, like subsection Fortunia and Aerata. So those grow in amongst the trees. And so they've evolved to be competitive. Whereas a lot of the Taliensias and Laponicas and the plants from the high mountains don't have competition other than with them, their own species. See? So those are the ones that are more difficult, more picky. And that's why we have better luck growing Suchoanense and Calophytum and Fortunia and all those sorts of things, because they grow right in with the larch and maple and oak trees, so they're used to it.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. And I should have brought in Joe, sorry, but I have the Alpine Maccavianum blooming for the first time. Which, can I run it? It's right out in the garage. If I run and get it, I can show people.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay,
Yes, please.
pretty excited. It's the first time we flowered it. I'll be right back.
And Ken Z, I see you have your hand up. Why don't you ask your question next?
Well, you can probably answer it.
Put your hand up.
When they built those mounds up to put the roadies in, there were 3 components, I think he said, and one was coarse sand, the other one was gravel. And wasn't there a third component?
Bark. It was bark.
That makes sense. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I can tell you that when I was growing my rhododendrons on Cape Cod, I would dig a hole about 1 or 2 inches deep because all I had was clay. And so I would place the root ball in that and then build up my soil all around it. And the soil was really just chopped up leaves and pine needles. And from there, I got over 1,000 rhododendrons planted the same way. And it was only because the substrate was so lousy. So I've been doing that for a long time, as well as planting some of my varieties on logs in the greenhouse.
Oh, that's interesting. One would think that on the Cape you'd have mostly sand, but you happen to be in a patch of clay. Huh?
I had a lot of clay, very little sand where I was.
Yeah,
Is-
sorry, that took a bit longer than I thought. The garage was locked, so I had to go
I'm
all the way
sorry,
around the office.
Is there any way that you can take it off of Steve's screen so that we can see the participants?
Oh, right.
Holding up.
Here, I
Thank you.
can hit stop share, I think.
Oh, that's better.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There, that's good.
Sorry. Trying to do two things at once, a bit difficult.
So,
Anyway, so here's the famous Alpine Maccabeanum Nate 052. The light's bad. It's actually a pretty good deep yellow. Does that show up?
Yeah.
Yep. Little bit washed out, but we can see
Yeah.
it.
It's actually for a Maccabeanum, a really good yellow with a big purple blotch. And it's in a pot, obviously, which is why it's blooming already. None of the ones out in the garden have buds, but it's just opening. You can see the bud scales are pretty tight. So I'm pretty stoked. We'll get photos and then collect a ton of pollen
Super.
and get that out to folks. So anyway, finally, after that was 2003 when we collected that. So
Steve, my name's John Quinn. I'm growing one. I've been growing one of those from you for a couple of years.
oh, great.
But I don't know whether I put it in a lot of shade. But I don't know whether it wants, if it's an alpine form, does it really want more sun or more shade or what? What's
I-
it
I
like
think-
a typical Maccabeanum?
My meeting. Context menu. Exit full screen.
I think in your situation, I would keep it in the shade.
Okay.
It doesn't, it's a bit harder to grow than regular Maccabeanum. It's a lot less vigorous. Again, it's an alpine, so it doesn't have the vigorousness of for us anyway, typical Maccabeanum. And we struggle to grow it well here even. It's a bit tricky for a big leaf. It does want light, but I would sacrifice the stress for the keeping it alive, because if you put it out where it's going to get too much light, it might get stressed out, or too hot. I mean, I don't know your exact situation, but even here, it doesn't like to be in full sun.
Okay.
For me, it did very well on the north side of our building, our house, about maybe
Okay.
8 feet away, where it got a lot of skylight, but not
Right.
much direct sunlight.
Okay.
Did very well until the deer hit it really hard, and then it went downhill from there.
Yeah, that's too bad. But anyway, if people are, I know some of you hybridize, so we'll try to collect as much pollen as we can and get that going. And hopefully in years to come, we'll have more bloom and we can get some hand pollinated seed going, because I'm out of the wild seed. So
Yeah, offer it for sale again, please.
yeah, that's the thing. See, I don't have seed any longer. So until we get 2 clones to bloom that I can cross, we won't be able to offer it. So
Oh, yeah.
anyway, were there any other questions?
Well, I have a couple.
Okay.
On cardiocrinum, are they self-fertile, or do you need 2?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And
Yeah.
are the seeds typically very, very thin, even the,
Right.
so they're very thin, okay. Good.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm getting lots of seed, but I didn't know if it was sterile or not, if it had.
You don't need cross pollination, but people have to remember it takes them 2 years to germinate.
Oh,
So
it
you have to wait a while before you see anything. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
So literally 2 years, and then usually another 6 or 7 until they bloom, if you're growing it well. So that's why the divisions off the bulbs are the way a lot of people go, because you're waiting forever otherwise.
Yeah, okay, that explains why mine never blooms, never germinates the first year.
Yeah, you have to keep that pot just hanging around for a while.
And a question on epiphytes. What are the hardiest epiphytes that might have a chance for New England?
Oh
Are there
boy. Among rhododendrons?
Rhododendrons, yeah.
Let's see. Yeah, boy, even sorry. Trying to think of what the hardiest. We have some of the Vietnamese vireas that have been outside for 20 years, but you're going to get down to 2 or 0, and that's going to wipe them out even, eventually.
Okay.
Yeah, some of the Vietnamese vireas, or you could, no, I wouldn't try that even. I don't think there are any, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah.
It was worth asking.
Yeah.
Hand up.
All right, other questions from anyone?
John?
Steve, I just have a thing to say. We've been chasing contact zones in the United States between diploid and tetraploid deciduous azaleas for 10 years, 12 years or so.
Right.
And we were lucky enough early on to find a lot of glendulaceum contact zones that had triploids in them, but we were never able to find one in an astrinum contact zone. But we finally found one in Albany, Georgia. We found a contact zone between canescence and astrinum in it, and plus it has alabamians and viscosum in it, and we found 4 triploids there. So it does appear that astrinum in contact with diploids will produce triploids just like they do calendulaceum. So we're pretty hopeful.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's been interesting work. I've been following that. It's great stuff.
Jeff, I see you have your hand up. You'll have to
menu.
unmute. There you go. Okay. True.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my question is, could you comment on the Hudsonii with the silver idiobenum on the underleaf from seed, and on the new Thompsonii that you raved about that are from seed?
Okay, sure. Excuse me. Excuse me. So Hodgsonii is really widespread. Okay, so think of the Rockies go from, northern Canada down into basically almost northern Mexico, depending on how you define it, but at least into Arizona, and take one species and have them grow from northern Canada down to Arizona, and you're going to get quite a bit of variation. So that's Hodgsonii in the wild, grows over that sort of range, right? It's really dominant, really common, really widespread, and quite variable. So it can have kind of fuzzy brownish tan indimentum. It can also have really plastered, smooth, silvery indimentum. So it's just variation within the species, basically, is all that is, depending on where it's collected. The new Thompsonii, I think you mean the species Thompsonii itself. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so the one that I was raving about is, I've seen that quite a bit in the wild, and there was one population in Sikkim. I was there in spring of 2015, and the entire population had really superb flowers, is all. So sometimes they're sort of scarlet or smaller or thinner. These had really great texture. They were quite large, and they were all really deep red. So that's why I like those. And because the whole population that was that way, you can sort of assume, and it's still nature, but you can sort of assume that most of the progeny will probably be pretty good too. So, we have a big collection of Thompsonii here, and some of them just aren't a great color, really. I mean, they're wild collected or whatever, and we keep them in the collection, but they're, if I had room to grow one at home, I would want one from a known good source, sort of thing. That's all. If that answers your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Sally and John, you have another question?
Oh, forgot to put actually, I just was going to make a comment on epiphytes, and I think Steve's quite correct. If you think of epiphytes in New England, what would you name? And you wouldn't, because their roots are just so exposed to such cold temperatures that it's just not a great idea.
Right. And you do get periods of drought and that sort of thing as well. Yeah, which is why you think we grow epiphytes successfully here, but we have very few native epiphytes because we do have that super dry summer.
Text menu.
So even the most common epiphyte here is Polypodium, which is Glycyrrhiza, which is licorice fern. If you've been out here before, you see the maple trees and things just covered with this evergreen fern, which is about yay tall. And it grows in the winter. So they look beautiful right now, but in June, July, as soon as it dries out, they go dormant until the following, basically October or November. So it has a complete reverse life cycle, because November to June is when it rains here. And so even our epiphyte goes dormant in the summer because it's so dry. I mean, if you don't know our climate, pretty much all or 98% of our precipitation comes in the dormant season in the winter. So people think it's rainy in Seattle. Yeah, it is this time of year, but it's 75 degrees and dry from middle of June to the middle of October. You know, I mean, literally no rain usually. So that's why we have to water constantly the rhododendron garden, because rhododendrons come from a monsoon climate, which is the exact opposite, right? So most of the precipitation where they grow comes during the growing season, which is why they do so well there and why they can grow on a cliff. Versus if we tried to do that here, you'd have to have a drip line going, you know, the entire summer to keep that plant alive.
The comparison here is that I'm right now down in Pensacola, Florida, where we have our live oaks and they have their epiphytic resurrection ferns that grow on them. And you do have native orchids. There's only a few species up here in Pensacola, but as you go further and further south, there's a much larger collection of orchids that are found as you go down into the Keys.
Right. Yeah. Tons of them down there. Yeah. Growing. Yeah. Epiphytically. Right. Cool stuff.
I have a question. Do you ever use the misters that were popular about 10 or 15 years ago by
for propagation or out in the garden?
Out in the garden.
No, we don't have that. But when we do get an extreme heat event like we had in June when we went up to 108 degrees, that's freaky for August for us even. We dealt with that by turning on, we have overhead. We don't have drip lines. I like overhead. It cools everything down. It adds humidity to the air, et cetera, et cetera. So what we did was we just ran the overhead sprinkler lines about once every hour or two for a couple of minutes, right? So similar effect.
Well,
So
I was talking about the stuff that White Smith was selling about 20 years ago.
You mean the vireas?
Yeah, but they were misters.
Oh, well, we have a mist. We have
them outside in the garden.
We don't have those out in the garden. We have a fog system in the conservatory for the vireas, which comes on based on computer readings. So if the humidity level goes down to a certain level, we have this fog system, which is actually pretty cool. People love being in there when that comes on. It's like you're in the tropics sort of thing, but we don't have anything like that in the garden.
No, I had them on risers in the garden.
Yeah, that I would love to do that. It would, I mean, we could grow a lot of things more successfully that way, but we buy city water. And so we have to be really careful about that. The
Steve,
I have 2 months water.
Getting back to lactium, how variable is that in the wild? Do you ever see it with significant endomentum?
Not really, no. You'll get some variation in flower color from creamy white to yellow. It's not always yellow even, but generally it's yellow. But what we're having better luck with now are what I'm calling the eastern form that I've written about in the past, from the eastern end of the range, more into northeastern Yunnan and adjacent parts of Sichuan. Like I showed the mountain Wumengshan at the beginning, where that one that I showed on the cliff, that's the eastern form. They have much bigger leaves. The leaves are like that. I mean, it's really incredible. It's like a big leaf, and it's more vigorous and easier to grow. So we're finding that with Spheroblastum, the eastern form, which is Spheroblastum variety Wumengensi, and then the lactium that it grows with. And we're just having better luck with those than from the old classic Forest and Kingdom Ward collections. Those guys never went to those eastern parts, so we never had that material. But they're actually better garden plants, more ornamental, and they're easier to grow. They're still not easy. They're just easier, if that makes sense. Yeah.
They're impossible here, but
yeah, we struggle here too.
Yeah.
The area where they did well for me for a long time was on the edge of the garden, but that's also where we have mountain beaver, and lactium doesn't respond well to being cut back. And not like a triflora and azalea, just bushes right back. Lactiums don't come back really. So I lost a ton of lactium to mountain beaver, and we had to move the collection, but now where they're growing, they don't do well. So it's a struggle. I'm thinking of going into roses, actually. No, I'm kidding, yeah. But
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
Steve, you mentioned, you showed a picture of your preparation of a raised bed and using basaltic sand, I think you said, or something like that.
just any coarse sand. You just don't want to have the round sand like from a beach. You need the coarse sand so you have the angles, which keeps the porosity levels higher. Yeah.
But you don't have it specially ground. You just
No,
use that.
no, it's harvested up in the mountains, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know where they get it, to be honest. I hadn't thought of that, but I
Okay.
had to look around to a lot of suppliers in the Puget Sound region to find the right sand.
Oh, right.
And I get it from them every time. Yeah, they're the only ones that have the right sand. So hopefully they don't go out of business.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I just have a comment. If you're looking for sharp sand in more moderate quantities, we're not running giant nurseries. Chicken grit from any good ag store is what you want to get.
All right.
Jeff, you have a question?
Yes, I'd like to know which among the Taliense bloom at a younger age, would you say? Because many of them, you're told, take a long time to bloom.
Yeah, most of them do. What would be the youngest? Well, the Dacheng Gensi that I showed, but that's not in distribution yet. The little tiny guy from southeastern China in the subtropics, that bloomed at 4 or 5 years old. But for the regular Taliensia, what would be the earliest? Boy, I can't think of any that bloom really early. I mean, I have collections from 25 years ago that haven't flowered yet, you know, on most of them.
Yeah.
I don't think any of them would be really early. We do have, which if any of you ever come out, ask to see me and I can show you the Taliensia that I collected on the east coast of China, Shaniai, which should be really heat and cold tolerant. And it has spectacular foliage. Big round leaves like this, glossy on top with a thick brown indumentum beneath. Way over in eastern China, away from the Himalayas and western China, you know, growing with Anhui and azaleas and things. So if we can get that going and get some of that pollen, I have one that's probably 4 feet tall now. So when that blooms, we'll definitely get pollen out to folks back east.
What? How do you spell that?
Shanii.
Okay, thank you.
So it was just described in the 80s by Chinese botanists. I found it in the flora of China and made a trip to that mountain range and there it was. So it's actually a medium-sized tree, 20, 30 feet tall. Beautiful foliage, pink flowers. Again, if you come out for the conference, for the pre-conference tour, I'll point it out on the tour here at the garden. Or if you're just out sometimes, it's sort of hidden. But if you want to see it and you're out, just ask at the shop to contact me and I can show you the plant. So I don't have it labeled or anything because there are only 3 in all of North America currently. So.
Okay.
All right, how about one more question and we'll let Steve go. Anybody?
All right.
Maybe
Well,
it.
great. Good to see everybody again. I see a lot of familiar faces.
Right here.
Hopefully we'll, oh, Sally? Oh, you were just waving?
I'm waving goodbye and
Oh,
just
okay.
saying it was an absolutely wonderful presentation and thank you very much.
Oh, you bet. No, it's
Thank
great.
you very much.
Great to be doing this sort of thing again. I'll see you all in the flesh at some point soon, hopefully. Everybody take care.
All right.
Yeah, Joe, I'm gonna go ahead and head out, Joe, if you don't mind. Yeah.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, thank you.
The rest of you don't go away. There are a few announcements and then Susan has a short presentation. A few announcements. First of all, on plants for members, P4M. We plotted up over 1,200 plants in 3 work sessions in the last month or so and have set the 2 important dates for the spring. The big plant sort will be on April 23rd. The time will be, well, I'm set up at 10 a.m., but I suggest you get there. It'd be helpful if you could arrive if you're helping out a little before 10. And the sale will be on May 14th. The sale will open to everyone at 11, or at least that's the target. So for volunteers, you should be there before 10, hopefully, to help lay everything out and also to pick your own plants. For those of you who don't know how P4M runs, we for donors and volunteers, they get first crack at up to 20 plants of their choice. And then the sale's open to everyone. Once it's open to everyone, the volunteers can also select additional plants if they so choose. But that's the incentive to get you involved with either donating cuttings or helping out with the work sessions. Memorial Weekend, we're going to have this year. We're going to have a show and sale for the first time in 3 years. The dates are May 28th and 29th. And as always, we'll be looking for volunteers and exhibitors. If you have trusses, bring them in. We always need people to enter trusses in the show. We want to make this look really good for the public. Last year, we had several hundred people go through the show. Susan, I think you know better than me. What was it, 400 or 500 people that filled out popular vote cards? So
Yep.
An indication of how much exposure we had at Tower Hill. And we hope to do the same this year. If you do volunteer or you're going to enter trusses in the show, you get to come into Tower Hill for free. You'll have your you'll be able to just say, hold up your truss or something and say I'm entering a truss, and they'll let you through. Next month, our April meeting is also when we have our annual election. If anyone is interested in running for either one of the board seats or an officer position, please contact me or one of the other board members or officers in advance to talk about what's available. And we would love to have new blood on the board or as a new officer. And okay, any announcements from anyone else?
Now, anything for the newsletter? Can I have it around April 1st?
Can I just say one thing? I was counting on a slide list that obviously has not happened.
Yeah.
So I can't guarantee anything about these minutes. I am really, really sorry.
That's fine. If you want to take a stab at it and send it to me or someone
I
else.
can't even begin some of it, Joe. I think I may have to listen to the recording if I can pause it midway and see if I can get something out of it and then go out and Google names.
Okay.
I would just do, he had headings, categories he dealt with. Just state them, and maybe between Joe and me, we can come up with a brief description.
Well,
In other words, not a slide list.
I'll try from the recording if I can. I've talked to you offline about getting access to that if I can. But apologies in advance.
I took some notes. I can help maybe too.
Can you scan them and send them to me? That would be awesome.
I think the handwriting, well, we have to rewrite them. Handwriting in the dark in a lecture, pretty sketchy. I'll see what I can do.
It's got to be better than mine, CJ. I couldn't even get phonetically for some of them. He was going so fast.
I just would not make them a slide list. I would do a general discussion of what the talk was.
No, don't kill yourself on that, Janet.
I have standards I have to uphold. I'm sorry.
I know. Any other questions or announcements or anyone else? Anyone wants
So
to-
I have one question, and that is this was recorded. Where do you post the recording?
Yeah, good question. I have in fact recorded it. And it will be a file on my PC, on my laptop, but where to put it or how to put it out on YouTube or wherever is beyond my skill set at this time.
Do you have a YouTube account for the chapter?
No.
I could set one up, Joe. It's pretty easy.
It's actually, that's the easiest thing to do. You go to YouTube. If you have a YouTube Gmail account, you'll have a YouTube account and you simply upload it
Okay.
as a video.
Why don't we talk offline?
Okay.
Tim, I heard you.
Yeah.
Sounds like you know how to do it. Yeah, let's talk about that offline. But yeah, that would be the way, that would certainly be the place to put it if possible. All right, Susan, do you want to
Yeah, I have more an exhortation than I mean, what I really want to do is encourage people to enter in these shows. That's the hardest hurdle that we have to get over. I have people who always enter and people who never enter. And since we're all growing some plants, this is feasible. I'll talk mostly briefly about the early show because that's coming up on April 24th. Nobody knows what the weather's going to do to us, but with luck, we'll have some interesting stuff that can be entered, many of which will be lepidotes, which have a slightly different focus than the big eleps. Lepidotes, we tend to cut sprays or pieces of branches rather than, you don't bother bringing in your little tiny single terminal. That would be kind of funny, unless you're someone like Russ who grows tiny, tiny plants. The rule is look for something that looks as best as it can. It doesn't have to be perfect. I think it's more important that we get a variety of entries than a very small number of perfect ones. I think we're our own worst enemies much of the time. Oh, I can't enter because I don't have something that's as good as what Joe will bring. But we have to get past that. With the leps in particular, also azaleas, we're talking about sprays that can be no more than 15 inches from top to bottom or side to side. In other words, you can't bring in a whacking great chunk of it. Look for presentation. You're looking for terminals that have a nice assortment of relatively undamaged flowers and buds. More and more of us don't spray. I mean, I live under pine trees and oak trees, which are constantly dropping pine needles, pine cones, acorns, and damaging stuff. Look for something, especially with the lepidotes, think kind of oriental. You're looking for a Japanese print style, something that looks good as well as representing the cultivar or the species that you're bringing in. You should clean out the debris, get rid of, old oak catkins, pine cones, stuff like that. Clean it out carefully, but do not remove any living stuff. You cannot pick off damaged flowers, buds that have, a caterpillar hole in them. You can't pick out stamens, don't pick off leaves that look bad. 1 year's worth of growth only, clean it up as best you can. In general, if you have a choice of a spray with unopened buds, a few unopened buds, or one that's going by, go with the earlier one. We are penalizing unopened buds less and less these days. But the critical thing is just to enter. You need to, if possible, know what it is you're entering because you'll have to fill out a registration form. If you truly don't know what it is, and all of us have plants that, where the chipmunks have taken the tags, it will go in an unknown class category, which is fine. But if you do know what you have, please write it down accurately. It makes me happy when I write up the results if you actually spell the thing correctly. But that's really the bulk of what is involved. I mean, every May newsletter, I publish the same one-page instructions on how to pick a truss. But for the most part, especially for the early show, it's more intuitive than not. Just make it big enough, but not too big, and make it your best.
Okay, thanks, Susan. Wanted to say a word to the members from the Connecticut chapter. First of all, thanks for attending. And also, you're always invited to our Plant for Members work sessions and certainly the sale, as well as our show and sale at Tower Hill. We'll be giving 4 presentations there on various subjects, so you're certainly welcome to come and attend those. And as Susan alluded to, our April 23rd meeting will be in person at Elm Bank in the Putnam Room, where we will have the early trust show. Starts at 1 p.m. The speaker is Brent of Brent and Becky's Bulbs. And that concludes today's meeting. Thank you much for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
All righty, take care.
Happy spring.
You too.